The world of trading card games is a ruthless one. Many hundreds have met their fate and died. However, the remains they leave behind never truly vanish from this world. Welcome to Cards from the Abyss!
Hey everybody, this is Kodak here, and welcome back to Cards from the Abyss, the show where we take a look at card games from a long time ago, take a look at how they died, and maybe learn a thing or two in the process, or at least go over some history. So, it is the month of October, so what better thing to talk about than a once beautiful, wonderful, and popular thing that has since transformed into a shambling corpse of its former self. That's right, we're talking about Neopets! Yes, Neopets, for those of you who have never heard of it before, it's kinda Webkins before Webkins was a thing. I don't know if that helped a lot of you out there. I'm sure a lot of you get it now, a lot of going, oh, but Neopets is a browser game where you get a free little creature, one of the eponymous Neopets, which you then can raise with food and explore a fun world and, you know, play a bunch of sort of Flash-based arcade games. Now, in the early to mid-2000s, these things were at the height of their popularity. They had, you know, like, merchandise, like plush toys and card games and McDonald's Happy Meal toys, which I actually still have a few of here. Good old Starry Paintbrush and Yellow Aisha here. These days, however, it is, you know, a bit of a, it is, like I said, a mere shell of its former self. Apparently there hasn't been any meaningful update to its content in like 3 years. Flash getting shut off meant that hundreds of features on the site are no longer usable, even though they had over 3 years of warning to get things fixed up, and apparently it is like on the precipice of becoming an NFT scan. Now, what is an NFT? NFT means non-fungible token. It's basically Bitcoin, but worse. You know, it's just as wasteful, where you still have to ping thousands of computers to confirm the digital signature, which is incredibly energy intensive, but it has none of the alleged financial security that Bitcoin has. It's literally connected to pictures instead of to money, and it is up to the gills in fraudsters. There are people who rebuy their own NFTs to artificially increase the value and also increase the value of their cryptocurrency. There are cases where people have stolen a ton of the assets used to make NFTs. There are cases where people have taken the money and run, way too many of those to count. Lots of pump and dumps, and of course, there's the fact that so many of the NFTs are just terrible looking things where NFTs don't even give you the copyright privileges to the people who buy them. It's more like buying a DVD of a movie than it is like actually buying art. So just generally steer clear of it. Apparently, the Neopets parent company decided to approve an NFT without actually talking to the people who actually work on Neopets. So yeah, that's the state of this thing. It's in a sorry state. Such a sorry state that I did not even bother to go and look at the website to try to capture footage for this video. So, let's get that out of the way. Let's get that out of our systems, because I figure we'll use this video as an opportunity to really enjoy the glory days of Neopets. I was in high school when this came out, but it was made by a bunch of college kids who were playing it with each other, so there were a lot of people my age who actually played the original Neopets, and the Neopets card game was part of it. I mean, I'm the kind of person who's like, I see a game, I pick it up. Like, I think the card game was actually like my first real exposure to Neopets. It's a very, very interesting game, mainly because it doesn't actually make use of like violence or anything. You're not trying to like kill your opponent's Neopets or anything scary like that. There's no life points, and it is also a lane-based game. And now when I talk about a lane-based game, I mean kind of like the lanes in League of Legends, where both players try to push like damage or something through the same lane as the opposing player, only in this case it is a bit different. So let's take a look here. First of all, I do want to talk about this starter deck a little bit, because there is something interesting that this deck is doing, and that is that this is a deck, a 2-player starter set that includes a pair of half decks. Normally, if you put out a starter deck, you want to make sure that it is tournament legal. Like, I've seen cases, like there was a game called Epic Battles, put out by Score, the same people who did like the Dragon Ball game and the Bleach game that I like so much. So a Score starter deck comes with 60 cards. Character cards, 7 rare cards, and 52 common cards for a grand total of, yeah, that's a grand total of 60 cards. Do you know how many cards you need to play a game of epic battles? 61! So yeah, don't do this. Don't ever do this. It also does the thing where you get a random deck. You don't know what deck you're actually getting in here until you open it. That's, you know, a very outdated model. It's really stupid. It's trying to lift the purchase limit on starter decks, and honestly, to me, it's scummy behavior. But the exception to this rule is if it is meant to be an easy-to-play starter set for 2 players, and you make the deck smaller to, 1, simplify the game, and 2, keep costs down. So keeping the deck sizes smaller for a 2-player starter set is perfectly acceptable thing to do. This is the basic starter set, but we're going to be looking at some other stuff. The important thing is we need to get this playmat out here because these lanes are different from how most lanes are done because they are, in fact, contest arenas. Sorry for all the reflections going on here. This is a mat that's all folded up. I'm planning on giving it a scan and a lamination at some point like I did with my Huntic stuff. I actually believe in you know, taking actually archiving this stuff. It's something that Board Game Geek is loath to do, but I actually kind of want the idea of like taking like these old rule books and game mats and like scanning them in and building an archive of them that anybody can access and use. Not like something that can like replace the game, not like scanning in all the cards and stuff, but scanning in the rules and the playmats so that people who can get the cards have a way to easily play it. Board Game Geek, I imagine, it avoids this because of copyright stuff, but I don't think any game out there would mind if, you know, the features of their game to help people play the game get, like, properly documented and stuff. But anyway, moving on. Each of these lanes are actually called contest arenas because each one lines up with a different stat on the Neopets cards. You have strength, agility, magic, and intelligence, and these are based on stats from the actual online game. Your creatures would have these stats in the game, and there are like contests and stuff and battle challenges and things that you can do on the actual browser game that this game is meant to simulate. Now, in each of these lanes, you can do something that is called a contest, and what happens is you tap your Neopet. This is a game by Wizards of the Coast, so they're allowed to use that word. I don't know why they trademark such an obvious term. And what happens is you attempt contests against your opponent's Neopets in an effort to win. Now, my Grarl here has a strength of 9 versus my opposing Scorchio, which has a strength of 7, which means I don't necessarily win, but I do have an advantage, because what happens is both players then roll a 6-sided dice to determine a winner. And what happens is, if I am the one to launch a contest, and I'm only allowed to do 1 contest in each lane per turn, which is a big incentive to diversify, what happens is if I win, I am allowed to take an item card from my hand, which is one of these red cards here, or an equipment card, which is the blue cards here, and put it into my bank. You'll notice how these cards here have little like coins down here. That is the value of the card, and the goal is to bank 21 points worth of cards, to be the first one to do that. So it's a victory point game rather than a life point game. It does mean sending cards from your hand in order to do it, but there are tricks to get around this. I'll go over those a bit later. But I really like the idea of having these different lanes, because it means it creates like immediate tension. It's like in your deck design, do you want to make a deck that is like really focused, really tightly focused on like 2 of these lanes? Like if I did Grarl with its really high stats and Yellow Aisha with its really high and focused magic and strength stats to just be guaranteed to win at whatever events they go at? Or do I use cards like Waki or Drake, which have lower general stats, but a greater variety of stats that are decent in, which allow me to be more flexible and try to win in more arenas and be better at affecting my opponent's decisions? And this creates some pretty immediate tension, because you're allowed to have 3 Neopets in play at a time, which means one of these arenas is going to be open to be possibly exploited by your opponent. And it creates more interesting tension no matter what kind of deck you make, because even if you come up against an opponent, you can have a tense match where both you and your opponent are trying to win in the same arenas, or you can have an equally tense match where you're not competing in general arenas and have to find a way to otherwise stymie your opponent. It's a really, really good design for a game, associating each of the lanes with a particular stat. It affects deck building decisions, it affects on-the-fly strategy. It's just such a great idea in general. But of course, using these Neopets isn't as simple as you might think. They are difficult to get out of the arena. However, part of that is because your draws of these basic Neopets are actually random. What you do is you actually take a deck of 10 Neopets and you shuffle them into a stack and deal from the top at the start of each turn until you have 3 of them in play, which means if one ever does go away, you deal a fresh one to replace it. There are a few cards that can make that happen. But for the most part, if you win in a contest, the Neopet does not get eliminated. So you do have, you are limited to 3 copies of each card in both your regular deck and your Neopet stack, but if you really wanted to focus on like one character, they do come in other colors. Like you have the yellow Aisha, they also come in like blue and green and white, same with Grarls. They come in enough colors that if you wanted to build an entire deck based on one Neopet, although that might be a bit ill-advised, you absolutely could. Now, there are other cards that can help out a Neopet, including the cards that you bank, like Equipment. Equipment requires you to tap a Neopet in lieu of using it in a contest. However, with the 1 contest per arena rule at the time, that can mean, you know, either tapping a redundant Neopet you have in one of the arenas in order to use its effect, or perhaps whatever Neopet you're using to run interference against your opponent. For example, my green Aisha has a pretty high intelligence score of 11 too, so it could run of 7. It could run interference on an arena battle and be the thing I use to play the cards that require me to tap in order to put into play. Now, Equipment offers a permanent boost. It can also offer a special ability. I would ideally put this card on my Aisha to give it that bonus. I actually kind of like how they have the numbers on the side here, so you can just tuck the Equipment card underneath to see that effect, although Ilizen's Staff also has an effect. But a lot of them are just raw stats, and the ones that are raw stats can just tuck in like that and show you how much they give. It's just a wonderful little thing. This other Equipment card I have here reminds me that, you know, the idea of, you know, having contests instead of battles sounds fun, sounds like a kid-friendly, non-violent game. However, then a set called Battle for Meridel came out that kind of removed that whole notion. Meridel is actually, it's part of the lore of Neopets. It's a sort of a medieval place where you have like the heroes and the villains. They're fighting each other for control of Meridel Castle, and it makes sense to use it in a card game because it is pretty easy and obvious with the conflict. But like I said, it kind of wiped away the idea that this game was entirely non-violent. Although this brings us up to our next card types. You have the hero cards and the villain cards. Now the villain cards are the important ones because what they do is they allow you to grief your opponents. You can't necessarily always have a Neopet to block them in, but you can instead plunk a villain down in front of them in order to stop them from doing it. Now, if you have a villain in an arena, neither player can perform any contests in that arena until the villain is dealt with, is eliminated in their own special contest, and they can have some pretty scary stats. So they're not necessarily easy to deal with, so they are a way to grief your opponent. However, you have to be careful because these villains, they don't just go out there at no cost. I mean, when you play them, you don't have to pay any cost to play them. However, if they get defeated, whichever player defeats them is granted a reward. For example, the Darkest Fairy here, who is probably one of the most powerful cards in the whole game, because if you lose to her, then your Neopet gets shuffled into the deck, or it can have the hero or experienced Neopet get discarded. However, if she gets defeated, the winning player gets to draw a free card. So they can be just as problematic as they are beneficial, because they don't count against the once per turn contest rule, because a lot of them untap their characters. They defeat the villain, then they get a free chance to attack. So there are risks and rewards to playing the villains. Now, opposite the villains are the hero cards. Now, what hero cards do is they are basically pinch hitters. They come into play and take the place of your Neopet for a turn. They can do a battle for you. They have some interesting abilities they can perform. They basically come out and save the day. They're very useful against villains because of their really high stats. Villains do not get to roll a dice to try to stop from being defeated. So if you get something out there that's stronger than them, they have no recourse and just get automatically defeated. There's also some fun heroes, like the one I had the most fun with was a card called Peasant Mob, because Peasant Mob is a hero that doesn't leave play. Its stats are low, but there's a trick to this card that I will show off later. They're also kind of a permanent assist to any of your 1 categories, and the fun doesn't stop. Oh, there is a lot more fun to be had, because you can hire heroes and villains, but you can also power up your own Neopets with experienced Neopets. Now, what these do is they are basically level up cards. Like you see Shadow Aisha here, which is actually a McDonald's promo. Remember when I talked about how this thing had Happy Meal toys? It buffs its stats from 8 to 11. It buffs its magic stat up to 11, which is even more powerful, and it has a special effect. All of these Neopets have some kind of experienced Neopet form that have some pretty formidable stats. Like this guy's strength goes up to 13, and he gets +3 to all stats against just 1 rival, which is going to happen a lot in this game, especially if it's, you know, somebody trying to prevent you from getting through, like they've thrown in a chump blocker to try to slow you down. That's not going to work against Growl or Brute. But yeah, there's all sorts of fun lore and stuff too. Like I already showed off the Darkest Fairy, who apparently there's a Darkest Fairy video game, which I've actually never played, but there's lots of fun lore too. Like the Catoaddy is its rules text literally invokes the fact that it hates darkness of any kinds, hates being in the dark like ever. And of course the Something Has Happened cards, these are the event cards. These are different from the equipment or the item cards in that equipment you can play at any time, items you can only play during battle. But these are basically the event cards. They can play at any time, they do their effect and go away. Now the term Something Has Happened is based on random events that frequently happen in the game where, you know, something, you know, you'll get a random item or you'll lose a random item or something like that happens. Like I cannot forgive the Pant Devil for stealing that wand of Ultranova that showed up that one time. But probably one of the more interesting things in the game are, of course, what I was talking about before with the items. So you have items which can not only be put into your bank, they tend to be worth more than equipment because they're one-shot items. They are also one-shots that you can use to buff your characters for 1 battle. At the start of a battle, each player can play 1 item to increase their score. Now, items tend to be worth more, although there are items that are worth less in the bank, usually because they provide some kind of higher bonus. Like Icy Snowball is only worth 2 in the bank, but it's a +8 bonus. Or, more fascinatingly, they have an on-bank effect. So if you win a contest and put a card like Red Paintbrush into the bank, then that triggers a special effect that you can use. So you're sort of delaying your victory to gain a different advantage. For example, Red Paintbrush allows you to actually go through your Neopet stack rather than having to deal off the top and swap in one you need. So if, for example, I drew all Aishas, but I need a Grarl into play, I win with an Aisha, I use the Red Paintbrush, and I swap in my red Growler here. It doesn't have to match the paintbrush color. That's just a coincidence because red is the one for strength. I can swap in the card I need. There's also Rainbow Paintbrush that allows me to search my deck for an experienced Neopet, also only at 2 bank. And then Jiren Plushie. Oh yes, we're coming back to that pin I asked you to put earlier. Jiren Plushie, while it's in the bank, all heroes gain +2 stats, and that is the card you combo with Peasant Mob. You get a few Jiren plushies in play, and this Peasant Mob suddenly gets really, really scary really, really fast. It becomes like 11s and 9s and 8s and all of its stats, and it's just hitting harder than a normal Neopet would. This is a very, very, very powerful card. I'm not sure if heroes are allowed to move, but whatever arena you place it in is going to be a pretty big nuisance. So this is the combo for the Fire and Earth deck I use. I have a Fire and Earth deck. I also have a Dark and Light Grarl Aisha deck. Unfortunately, some of my collection disappeared, so they're not perfect. But the Fire and the Fire and Earth deck is a combined Veggie hero deck, while this is just a plain old beatdown deck because Light and Dark gets access to so many powerful cards. But yeah, that is the Neopets card game. It has a lot of fascinating things tied to it. It has a lot of fun lore, a lot of funny things, like one of the more powerful cards in the game, at least one of the more powerful cards in my deck, is Fairy Dishwater, because it's a magic boost that goes back to my hand if I win. So I can, play it, gain its effect, get it back to my hand, and then bank it immediately. There are some other cards that you can bank immediately. There are ones with low value that allow you to get a bit of draw power, like Beyond Neopia. There's just a lot of fun going on. We have some popular characters like Vera. We have the character on Domination is Dr. Sloth. He's like the lead antagonist. He's the leader of the bunch, the evil bunch that is. But yeah, it's just such an interesting design. If you can get your hands on some cards from Neopets, if you can get like some decks, some cards, get them together, I say give this game a try. It is fascinating, and like I said, it is a sample, a glimpse as to what once was. And on that note, I think we're going to end it here. Thanks again for watching this episode of Cards from the Abyss, and until next time, this is Kodak signing off.